Hey everybody, I'm Braden Pitcher. I'm the State Outreach Coordinator for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. I want to say again, thanks Monica for setting these up and all the folks at the Homer Soil and Water Conservation District. Without our conservation district partners, both Soil and Water Conservation District and Tribal Conservation District partners across the state, we wouldn't be able as an agency to have nearly the footprint that we do. So it's extremely beneficial and really appreciate your support.
Yeah, let's
Um,
see.
you're not seeing, what was that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can figure out. In the room, we're not seeing the thumbnail of your face. We can see your presentation, but I'll see if I can keep working on it while you talk.
Okay. Well, and worst case scenario, maybe I'll just stop sharing my screen and I can wave to everybody at the end. So in the meantime, yeah, let's talk a little bit about who we are as an agency, what NRCS does, and get into some forestry talk. So, so what is NRCS? Who are we? So we're the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are a federal agency housed within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We started way back in the early 30s during the Dust Bowl. We had some really passionate um, soil enthusiasts that saw that through some unsustainable farming practices, we were losing one of America's greatest resources in our soil, our ability to grow our food and our fiber and feed ourselves. So they organized and said, "Hey, we got to do something about that," and that's where we came in. We started out as the Soil Erosion Service and then became the Soil Conservation Service. And over the years, we've evolved to start looking a little bit broader scope of natural resources across the environment. And our role is we exist to help help agricultural producers directly. So that includes farmers, ranchers, small farms, and forest landowners, and American Indian and Alaska Native tribes as well. And we help them conserve their natural resources. We offer a couple of different kinds of assistance, technical assistance. We have Chris Simpetis is our state forester. He is here on the call joining us. We also have biologists on staff. We have grazing and range specialists on staff. So we have a lot of technical expertise to be able to tap into there. But we also have some financial assistance available through some of our other programs. The unique thing about us as a conservation agency is that we don't own any lands, and participation in our programs is entirely voluntary. So we're primarily doing work on your private lands. So first and foremost, we want to work with you to help achieve your goals. Since all of our programs are completely voluntary, it's really up to the private landowner to really want to do conservation work on their property. And then we exist as a resource to be able to, as a bridge almost to help you get to where you want to be. And we'll do everything that we can within our own policies through the Farm Bill to assist our producers. So how that works, we've got lots of field staff across the state to help work with you on your property to develop a plan of attack, kind of identify what it is that you want to do, looking at all the different resources across your property and where there's opportunity for improvement. We really want to help your operation become more sustainable. Increasing food security is a major issue across the state. And the unique thing about our agency working within Alaska is that we consider management of lands for subsistence resources. So berry picking, wildlife harvest and hunting, those resources are considered to be agriculture for subsistence purposes and participation in our programs. So that's what makes working for NRCS Alaska fun and unique. So we exist to help landowners address natural resource concerns on your property. If you look, if you're working with some of our field staff and some of our conservation planners, you might hear the acronym SWAPA, SWAPA. That's basically, in a world of federal government, we oftentimes get lost in acronyms, but that's basically the resource concerns that we're looking at. We're looking at soil issues, compaction, soil erosion. We're looking at water issues, anything that's affecting water quality, plant productivity. If you're having an issue with, your trees are dying in your forested land, maybe you've got some wildfire risk on your property. That would be plant issues, animal grazing issues, energy efficiencies, air quality. These are all the resource concerns that we're looking at to be able to help with. So conservation planning, conservation plan, what is it? When you work with NRCS, one of the first things we're going to do is we work with you at the field level to put together a conservation plan for your property. At our field offices, we've got an NRCS planner that will come out and visit your forest land, your farm, come visit your property, do a site visit. And while they're there, they're going to help inventory the natural resources on your property and identify any issues there. And so they help to develop this conservation plan. This plan is kind of, think of it like a roadmap, basically helping you implement different conservation projects, different activities that help address some of those resource concerns that I just mentioned. It includes a map of your property. It incorporates your goals, your objectives. Basically, how do we address the issues on your property to improve some sustainability, some function, and help you get to where you want to be? I do want to make a note here, and Chris will talk about this in just a minute, that anytime that we're developing a conservation plan through our programs on forested acres, it does require a separate forest management plan. And we can get into some of the specifics of that in a minute. So everybody wants to know, how do we fund all this, right? Where's the money coming from? So through NRCS, all of our funding is tied to the Farm Bill, which, if you're unfamiliar, that's the primary agricultural and food policy instrument of the federal government. This piece of legislation is typically renewed every 5 or 6 years. And right now, we're operating on the Farm Bill that was passed in 2018. So we're due for a new one. All of us within NRCS are kind of hopeful that maybe we'll have a new one by the end of this year. So fingers crossed, we'll see what gets updated there. Within the Farm Bill, we've got a ton of different programs that we use to develop conservation plans and improve natural resources on the ground. We've got programs that focus on incentives for landowners to adopt different conservation practices, do different activities. We've got funds to help out partnerships between organizations. Conservation districts can help out, tribal conservation districts, other different conservation organizations that help expand some of our capacity. There's some funding for those. We've got easement programs for long-term protection of your lands. And then if there's something on your property that maybe we don't have a tool in the toolbox for that, and you're really interested in doing something innovative, we do have an avenue for applying for grants to do something new and unique as well. If you've been around NRCS at all in Alaska, you've probably heard of the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. It's definitely the most popular program that we have in Alaska. It's great because it can be kind of piecemealed out. If you just want to do one thing on a corner of your property, EQIP's definitely the way to go for you. Because of that, it's great for people that have never worked with us before, new forest landowners, new farmers, new clients. I think it is important to note that, unlike a lot of funding sources, it's not a grant. It is a contract with the government to implement conservation activities. So it's basically a reimbursement. The planner comes out to your property, develops a way to achieve some of your conservation goals, identifies some different activities to take. You apply for funding through EQIP, and then once you get a contract, you would implement the activities that were identified in your conservation plan. And then once those are implemented, you would be able to get reimbursed for some of that. The payment rates for different activities are not really intended to pay 100% of the cost for implementation. The expectation is that there's going to be a little bit of money out of your pocket, at least up front. But they can offset a lot of the costs of implementing some of these activities. So generally, we shoot for anywhere between 50 to 90% of what the cost of implementing some of these activities would be. So it can work out really well. Yeah. Our second one that we use is the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. This is one that works really well for folks who have been in the game for a little while. They've owned their property a little bit longer. They've been doing some level of conservation. Maybe they've already thinned some of their forest acres. Maybe they have reduced some of the fuel loading a little bit already for wildfire risk, and they want to do maybe a little bit more. This program would be meant for them. Um, Basically, we have to document that you're showing a base level of conservation, and then you're being incentivized to continue that level of conservation throughout the life of the contract. A couple of different things that are unique about CSP versus EQIP is this is a 5-year commitment. EQIP, you can just do a single year, one and done kind of approach. This is a 5-year contract. This is a little bit longer term commitment. The other thing that's different too is the payments. Within CSP, you'll receive an annual lump sum payment every year for 5 years. That payment is basically an incentive to maintain the level of conservation work that you're already doing. And then on top of that, there'll be payments to install additional conservation practices that would be identified in your conservation plan. So yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about any of these programs, you can call any of our staff in Palmer. We've got field offices across the state that can help walk you through these. Eligibility always comes up. There's 3 levels of eligibility that have to be met for involvement in any of our programs. We're looking at producer or landowner eligibility. We're looking at eligibility of the land itself. And then we're also looking at resource concern eligibility. So producer eligibility or landowner eligibility, excuse me. First, you got to have a social security number, or if you're applying for any of our programs as an entity, maybe you've got a business that you're running, you've got an LLC, you can apply for our programs that way, but you have to have some kind of taxpayer ID number through the IRS. Secondly, you've got to be able to show that you've got control of the land. Maybe you own it outright through a deed. Maybe it's somebody else's land. You've got an agreement or a lease to work on it. You got to have control of the land. Third, you've got to have an adjusted gross income of less than $900,000, which, important to note, does not apply to federally recognized tribes. Sorry, was there a question in the room?
No, I think it was laughter mostly.
Yeah, and so lastly, you've got to be able to make decisions if you're applying as a business, right? You got to be able to have signature authority to enter into contracts. The land itself has to be eligible, right? In order to participate in our programs, we're really focused on production, on productive land. So agricultural production, in air quotes, cropland, rangeland, pasture, forest land. Tied underneath forest land, that could be if you're managing your forest for firewood or subsistence resources like wildlife habitat or berries. Those are considered agricultural lands in Alaska. And secondly, it's got to comply with our highly erodible land wetland conservation provisions. That's tied to the Food Security Act. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, we can talk about that at the end if you got some specific questions. Or you can chat with your local field office. And lastly, you've got to have a resource concern. That's SWAPA, the soil, water, plant issues that I mentioned earlier. There's got to be a resource concern that we're addressing so that that's kind of our nexus for funding for addressing some of these issues. And if you're new, you've never worked with us, first and foremost, we work with our sister agency, the Farm Service Agency. They kind of exist for record keeping and eligibility for our producers, our customers. So I recommend working directly with them first to establish a record for your operation. Once you appear in their system, you appear in our system, and we can move forward. And there's the contact information for the two offices for FSA in the state. We've got one up in Palmer that covers the southern half of the state, and one up in Delta Junction that covers the northern half. And I just wanted to highlight a little bit just the scale and the scope of kind of some of the work that we've done in the past. Um, so in FY24, last fiscal year, we had a total of 76 contracts across the state for a variety of different work. This includes cropland. It does include forest lands as well. Um, all the different types of productions that I mentioned. And last year alone, we spent a little over $15 million through all of our programs doing conservation work across our land or across private lands. So yeah, I think it kind of speaks a little bit to the scale of impact that we can have through NRCS through some of these programs. Also noted that 97% of all of the funding that Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP up there, $3.7 million, 97% of that went to producers that qualify as historically underserved. So maybe you're just starting out, maybe you're limited resource, low income, maybe you've got some veteran status. Those all went to folks that are just getting their feet under them too. So there's might be an opportunity for you. And then, of course, over the last 10 years, expanding that out, we've had almost 1,000 contracts. We've had 1,700 applications for all of our programs, about $94 million in all of our different contracts and our conservation work. So yeah, so we're out there, we're doing a lot of good work, and we can work together to maybe do some more conservation work on your property. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Chris to talk a little bit more about how specifically we're doing a lot of that work on forest lands.
Thanks, Braden. So this is almost one of my favorite slides in the presentation, but I have to allow for NRCS, this presentation is rare because there are so many pictures of trees. And for me, that's just kind of special because everyone always forgets about trees and focuses on the cropland. And here we have a presentation for forestry, which is pertinent for Alaska. As you see, our top practices are forestry practices, forest stand improvement, tree and shrub establishment, in other words, tree and shrub planting, road trail landing closure and treatment, woody residue treatment, which goes hand in hand with forest stand improvement. We have down at 7, organic organism passage, which is actually a biology practice, but it often occurs in the forest. So highlight that also. And then tree and shrub pruning. Go ahead and hit the next slide, Braden. So by count, or the number of contracts for practices, tree and shrub establishment, then forest stand improvement, woody residue. Well, we're just getting a lot of forestry done out there, which is awesome. Road and trail landing closure, which is another cool practice that helps remove some of those erosion issues on old degrading forest roads and trails, tree and shrub pruning, and wildlife or upland wildlife habitat management. Once again, a biology practice, but we tend to use it in the forest setting to monitor how wildlife are using the practices we've installed in the forest setting. Next slide, please. So benefits of conservation forestry. You can see a reduced pest and disease pressure. Forest thinning is known to reduce stress on trees ahead of disease and pest pressures. A reduction in wildfire risk. Improve wildlife habitat. I hear a lot of this actually in Southeast, where we have second growth forests that just don't support deer the same. I hear some of it around South Central, where they want to increase the carrying capacity for moose. Increase biodiversity, which in South Central and Northern Alaska, I think really go hand in hand with wildfire reduction and just overall ecological resilience. Next slide, please. So Braden had mentioned a forest management plan. I just wanted to cover what that is. briefly. It's a summary of who owns the property, a description of the property. Often we include that Farm Service Agency farm and tract number just to help tie the paperwork together for us. There's an inventory of the conditions of the forest related to the current condition of that forest, or we call it benchmark conditions. This typically has a forest inventory. We'll put a soils inventory in there. There'll be some sort of inventory about the animals, T&E species, threatened and endangered species, and on and on. It's important to note that this is also a living document. So stuff like that forest inventory does get updated from time to time. Forests are dynamic. They're not consistent. They change, they grow, things happen in them like wind throw, mortality, we thin them. So the forest inventory changes and the management plan's a living record of that. We also have a record of the goals and objectives that kind of set us in the direction of how we're going to manage that forest. We have recommended practices and a recommended work schedule that aligns with your goals and objectives. And I like to say great maps because in my experience in doing this almost 30 years now, the thing that catches people's eye and they can relate to the most are good maps where they can see the property, understand where stuff is being done, and it gives you that basis for that discussion. And often we include pamphlets from other agencies. The Forest Service has great pamphlets on pest and disease. We might have some pamphlets on fire and wildfire. It all depends on the property, where it is, and the goals. Next slide, please. Writing a forest management plan. This involves a professional resource manager, but it may not include one all the way through. There are some tools, the Department of Forestry here in Alaska, and I believe American Tree Farm System has some templates for landowners to start the management plan process. If you want, you can Google them. DOF, or Department of Forestry, has a link to their template on their website. It does require an in-depth knowledge of the land and forest being managed. And the nice thing with some of those templates is it also helps you build that knowledge and understand your forest more. It requires an inventory process that is dependent on the forest and the stand structure. And it really takes a few days, even on a smaller property. Now on those tools that are out there for landowners to start the process, at some point, you're going to need a professional. None of those plans will be ready to hand over to Natural Resource Conservation Service for our conservation planning, but boy, it will sure help the professional you're working with get a head start. Go ahead and hit the next slide, please, Braden. So what's the inventory process? It starts with delineating the stands, and a stand is a unique area in the forest. It's not going to be defined by the species that are in that area, the age of the trees, the topographic position, whatever makes it unique from the forested stand next to it. The number of inventory plots or points is normally calculated by acreage, but we have some allowable variation that both for budget and then the variation in individual stands. And you need more plots with more data, or the more complicated the data collection, the more plots. And what I mean by that is the more questions you ask about that resource. You can just ask the simple question of how many trees are out there. That's a pretty simple question to answer, but maybe then you go, how many trees are out there and what's the species diversity? Or how many trees are out there, what's the species diversity, and what's the cubic foot volume in each one of those species? Each question requires a more in-depth data collection. And if NRCS is involved, there's likely to be data collected beyond the forest inventory. We're probably going to look at wildlife elements, where we might look at soil elements. It all depends what's driving you to have us on the ground. Next slide, please. So what are some common goals that people have for forest management? Well, I hear reduce fire risk an awful lot. I also hear improvement in deer and moose habitat, seen thousands of acres of improvement in subsistence berry production. And I hear quite a lot of people ask about firewood production. There are many more goals beyond those. Those are just the most common. Go ahead, Braden. So these are the most common practices. There's actually 14 practices in the forestry discipline. I do put forest management plan on the top because nothing happens in the forest without a forest management plan. I think after that, pre-commercial thinning. I don't know if I've ever stepped on a forest that didn't end up having some sort of thinning event. Woody residue follows that, and in Alaska, woody residue tags right along with thinning work. Tree and shrub planting, we mentioned that. There are many reasons to plant trees and shrubs. Maybe you have an area that's poorly forested and you want a greater density or a greater diversity of trees. Maybe there was a past harvest there and the trees just never regenerated. Tree and shrub pruning. This can be done for numerous reasons. Obviously, it's part of a fire application in fuel breaks, but it can also be a wildlife practice in Sitka spruce stands where you're lifting that crown to get a little more sun to the ground. Fuel breaks is a very common practice here, and it's just a thinning of the forest in a linear feature, normally about at least 100-foot wide, where we thin the forest, we prune the trees, and we control the woody residue that results from that. Windbreaks are a typical agricultural forestry practice, and there's a biology practice in there that I see an awful lot. Structure for wildlife. Quite often with some of these thinning practices and with the fuel breaks, we'll see people planting brush piles for wildlife habitat. Go ahead, Braden. So here are some other practices that I've seen an awful lot on in the forest. And believe it or not, they still require some sort of forest management plan to do these. We see an awful lot of aquatic organism passage, and it's mostly related to old woods roads that weren't designed to current standards, where mostly fish passage is a problem. You may have perched culverts, you may have undersized culverts, you may have failing culverts, but this is really common. I'm seeing a lot of this some of this in South Central and some in Southeast Alaska. The benefits is better fish habitat, can improve fish populations, and provides management options to enhance long-term stream function. And if you haven't ever been involved with streams that aren't functioning properly, that's actually really big. Go ahead, Braden. So this is a really cool wildlife practice that I see a lot of in Southeast, and I think I'm seeing some in areas close to a peninsula. I've seen some recommendations lately. And it's stream habitat improvement and management. A lot of this has to do with reconnecting the streams to their floodplain and adding woody structures to the stream. It really is about creating habitat diversity and better habitat for fish. They're really cool practices. They normally incorporate woody material from the forest. And it's amazing to see an entrenched, unhealthy stream within a few years turn into thriving stream or salmon habitat. Go ahead, Braden. So how do you contact us? These are all of our field offices in the state. Feel free to take a picture of that slide. You can ask questions of us now, or you can reach out to a field office at your convenience. And there's another one of those cool pictures. I absolutely love paper birch stands.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
If anybody has questions in the room, and then in the Zoom world, if you guys want to type into the chat if you have questions, or raise your hand and you can come off mute and ask your question.
Yeah. With the NRCS, is there any assistance that they give? Like say somebody's trying to purchase a property, could they give them any information on that area or map? You know, does it have good resources? Is it worth it? You know, what could be on there?
Yeah, yeah, I can take that. So yeah, so any of our field office staff have the ability to basically provide technical assistance. And what that means is, we've got they exist as um, that frontline communication with any landowner. So if there's questions that you've got about, what's my soil on this property, or like, am I going to run into wildfire issues because these trees are too close together? Those kinds of things. That's all stuff that, if you're interested, that you could submit a request to your field office, and we've got soil maps of a lot of places in the state that they can basically make a soil map of that property and provide you with that. And that exists as a service. It's free of charge through technical assistance. So that doesn't have to be part of a contract or anything. But through that process, you may find that there's more that you want to do. And that's where we can tie in financial assistance. But yeah, just technical assistance is always free.
Thank you.
I'm here because I'm thinking of fire season coming up, and I know I should be thinning some trees on my property. And I think I had a forest plan maybe 10 years ago or something, but that stuff is long gone, and I haven't kept in touch with anybody about maintaining the practices.
Well, if I can jump in on that, I'm going to assume that the State Department of Forestry did a stewardship plan for you because they're one of the main providers of forest management plans in the state. And they would actually have a record of that and might be able to provide you with a copy of it. Now,
I think I have a copy even, but
okay,
yeah.
well, if it is 10 years old, the state does consider it to be out of date, and they will write a new one for you. They actually just hired a new stewardship forester for the peninsula. I don't know if they're up and functioning. Option 2 is we can take that plan and update it if you have particular practices you want to run with. So I think actually what I would recommend to you is go ahead and call our field office and start that discussion and see how it pans out for you. You might decide you want to have the state do a whole new plan, or you might decide, hey, we can move forward with this. These practices are still what I want. It's just the forest has grown a little bit and we need to collect some new data.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there a minimum size of property that you look at?
No, there isn't. Now, I'm going to tell you some of our practices may not be appropriate for very small practices or for like forest stand improvement. I normally let the field office make that call on each individual property to see if it's an appropriate practice for what's happening there.
Got a question in the chat here. When you come for a visit, can you cover multiple topics at once, such as a salmon stream, grazing pasture, wild berry production, and tree management?
Absolutely. We have staff that you might get one staff with multiple talents, or you might get multiple staff that come and show up and discuss all those topics extremely willingly with you. If you want to see a bunch of people who just love to talk natural resources, give our field office a call. That's what they excel at.
And then Nicole had a question about wetlands on properties. Are there programs related to wetlands, peatlands, and conservation of these habitats on your property? I understand that other programs that NRCS has, for example, high tunnels have restrictions about developing on wetland areas, but what about programs specifically designed for wetland or peatland conservation?
Yeah,
Did you
I
want
can,
to take this? Okay, go ahead, Brady.
yeah, beat you to it. Yeah, I can address that a little bit. So there's a couple of different avenues there. We do have specifically the Wetland Reserve Easement Program, or WRE. That, and we do have an easement specialist that works in our state office that works specifically on those, and she would be able to have more details on that than I do. My understanding of that program is that it is meant to set aside previously impacted wetlands or wetlands that are at risk of being impacted by agricultural development, basically breaking out new lands. It exists basically as a response to that program. Basically came out of a lot of poor management decisions in the Midwest when a lot of our wetland resources were tilled under and developed into ag land, and late down the road we recognize the benefits of those, the ecological benefits of those systems. So we do have the Wetland Reserve Easement Program. That's one. Within EQIP and CSP, there's some conservation practices that exist specifically for managing wetlands and enhancing wetlands. I'm not sure if any of those practices through those programs have been used in the state, but that's certainly something I can ask our technical leads on. But I do know that there are practices available through EQIP at a national level that that can address some of those things.
And then another question in the chat, do you help with planning access to an area of your property? This person needs to create a road or a trail to access the upper part of their property to make, to clear dead spruce.
Oh, I think I got that one, Braden. The answer is yes. We would actually treat that as what we call an associated practice. So you'd be treating that dead spruce, and we have practices called access road, forest road and trails, forest road and trail closure, and then of course in our engineering we have water structures like water bars and stuff to help keep those roads from being a problem. So yes, that's something we like to do.
Any other questions in the room or in Zoom?
I guess I have a question for Chris as a follow-up to that. Is there a requirement that if you open up an access road to manage a place, part of your property, is there a requirement to close that afterwards?
It depends on the nature of the property, and that digs into a little bit of state law that can be interpreted differently locally. As far as our processes, no. We do have a practice though that does allow us to temporarily or permanently close those roads. It's going to really depend on what the goal is of the landowner. If they want to maintain that road for occasional access, because forest trails and landings, that's not a full-time road, that's occasional access road. They would need to have water bars and appropriate structures so that they didn't develop soil and water erosion issues, and of course maintain them. The other option is, of course, putting that road to bed, blocking off usage, and depending on the degree of restoration that's needed, either restoring the surface or just water barring it and letting vegetation start growing on it.
Gotcha. So it sounds like the forest trails practice, then it's not necessarily just cutting a 2-track into a part of your property. There's associated, slope issues to consider and water runoff, things like that.
It's an interesting topic because people don't realize that even at a 2% slope, that's 2 foot of rise over 100 foot, you still need a water bar every 250 foot to prevent that water from becoming erosive. So yes.
Yeah, just Sounds like part of the planning process.
Absolutely is.
Some time left over. If anybody in Zoom wants to come off mute and chat or anything. If not, we can let y'all go early. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything.
Actually, I have one. I have
Oh, we
one
got
more-
one.
One quick question.
Mhm.
I think it's quick. Is there any general recommendation about spacing of trees for keeping the forest healthy and also for fire protection around your house?
Oh, those are almost two topics there.
Yeah, I realize
And-
that's said it, yeah.
And yes, a fire, there's definitely some fixed spacing, which really is driven by slope. So if you're flat, the general
Oh.
guidance is 10 feet between crowns. But in the Kenai, I'd be careful with that because you get a lot of blue joint grass, and that can become a fuel too. So we often make recommendations to actually maintain a tighter canopy in some areas to prevent the bluegrass, unless of course it's in an area where you can mow it. As far as in a forest stand, that's different. And recommendations are really driven off of the forest inventory and goals. I've seen some people come up with flat recommendations of 13 feet, but that's a very simple answer that may not always have the desired impact. So
Okay.
that's it. That's one of those cases where it really pays to sit down with a professional, get the forest inventory done, do some planning, and make sure you're going in the direction that best suits your needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just kind of tacking onto that a little bit, just as an example, right? Like an overall 10 or a 13-foot spacing may be adequate on a 0% slope, but if you've got a steeper slope, all of a sudden that spacing then may become, maybe you've got a 13-foot spacing, but your crowns are still really dense together, and that can still carry fire. So that's where the site-specific recommendations really come into play.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys very much for all that great information.
Yeah.
Oh, thank
Oh, I
you for
did-
having us tonight.
There is one lingering question that just popped up. What if your trees just look generally unhealthy?
Generally get somebody out there to look at them who can answer those questions.
Yeah, it's good to hear that we have a new forest stewardship person down here. I know that's really helpful. So
Yes.
awesome. Well, yeah, get in touch with NRCS, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, Division of Forestry. There's lots of resources out there related to this stuff. So get in touch if you have any more questions, and everybody have a great evening. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.